Chapter 2, Discovery, Section 2. The settlement of New Holland was proposed by Colonel Purry in 1723. He contended that in 33 South, a fertile region would be found, favourable to European colonisation. He offered his theory to the British government, then to the Dutch, and afterwards to the French, but with little encouragement. His views were submitted to the Academy of Sciences at Paris, who replied that they could not judge of countries they had not seen. Thus, the project slept until the great English navigator in 1770 gave certainty to what had been conjecture. To Dalrymple, the hydrographer, the impulse of this enterprising era is largely due. He fully believed that a vast southern continent must exist to balance the antipodes. So firm was his conviction that he defined its extent as greater than the whole civilized part of Asia, from Turkey to the extremity of China. Its trade would be sufficient to maintain the power of Great Britain, employing all its manufactories and ships. The position of this region of fancy was traversed by Cook, who found nothing but ocean. The doctrine of terrestrial counterpoise was disturbed. He, however, alighted on a great reality. The description of New South Wales by Cook and his companions, which charmed the public, attracted the attention of the Crown, and Botany Bay, named on account of the variety and beauty of its vegetation, long known through Europe as a region of gibbets, triangles, and chains, to be celebrated hereafter as the mistress of nations, was selected for a settlement. 565 men and 192 women, the pioneers of a larger division, were embarked under the charge of a military force composed of volunteers, comprehending, besides the staff, 16 commissioned officers. The fleet consisted of HMS Sirius, Hyena, and Supply, 6 transports and 3 victuallers. They assembled at the Mother Bank on the 16th March and sailed on the 13th May, 1787. They touched at Tenerife and then at the Cape. Separated into 2 divisions, they reached their destination within 48 hours of each other. On the day of their junction, dense clouds threw a gloom over the sea, but they rejected the omen and believed that they had seen the foundation and not the fall of an empire. Having found the bay unsuitable for location, they proceeded to examine the port called after Jackson, a seaman who observed it from the mast and immortalized his name. As they passed the capes which form an entrance, they were in raptures with the scene. The tall, mouldering cliffs, the trees, which touched the water's edge, and the magnificent harbour, 4 miles in length, begirt with a luxuriant shore. It was on the 7th February, 1788, that the governor was inaugurated. An area being cleared for the purpose, the military marched to the ground with music and colours flying. 750 convicts, 202 marines and their officers were assembled. The Standard of England was unfurled, the commission of Philip, the first governor, published, and the courts of justice proclaimed. The usual formalities being complete, Philip turned to the prisoners and declared his intentions. He had resolved to cherish and render happy such as might deserve his favour, but to allow the law its course with the impenitent and unreformed. In such language we discern the sentiments which prevailed. Banishment, not punishment for past crimes, was implied in the cheering alternative. From that moment he possessed authority to manumit, not less absolute than the sovereign, but immeasurably more power to avenge. Those who first entered New Holland and witnessed the elevation of the royal standard on the shores of Port Jackson described in terms of despondency its barren soil, barely compensated by its salubrious atmosphere. Contemporary political writers looked coldly on the infant establishment as the diseased and hopeless progeny of crime, one which could never recompense the outlay of the Crown either by its vigour or its gratitude. The projects entertained, in connection with commerce, were the growth of flax and the supply of naval timber, both of which had been reported by Cook as indigenous to Norfolk Island. When viewed in a commercial light, Captain Tench observes, writing in 1789, "The insignificance of the settlement is very striking. Admitting the possibility," he continues, "that the country will hereafter yield a sufficiency of grain, the parent state must long supply the necessaries of life. The idea of breeding cattle sufficient to meet the consumption must be considered very chimerical. Such desponding sentiments mostly attend the first stages of colonization, but in a much later period, the enterprise was regarded with scarcely less suspicion. "Why," said a celebrated critic, "we are to erect penitentiaries and prisons at the distance of half the diameter of the globe, and to incur the enormous expense of feeding and transporting its inhabitants, it is extremely difficult to discover. It is foolishly believed that the colony of Botany Bay unites our moral and commercial interests, and that we shall receive, hereafter, an ample equivalent in the bales of goods for all the vices we export." With what obstinacy an idea once mooted is cherished may be inferred from an opinion afterwards expressed by an authority of still greater pretension. The most sanguine supporter of New South Wales' system of colonization will hardly promise himself any advantage from the produce it may be able to supply. Its corn and wool, its timber and hemp, he excludes from the chances of European commerce and declares that the whale fishery, after repeated failures, had been relinquished. It is not less instructive than pleasing to notice the past epochs of opinion. We find consolation against the dark clouds overshadowing the future by discovering how many forebodings of ancient seers have vanished before the light of the event. These discouraging views were not, however, universal. Many distinguished men imagined an advancement which our age has been sufficient to realize. To commemorate the foundation of the colony, the celebrated artist, Wedgwood, modelled, from clay brought from the neighbourhood of Sydney, an allegorical medallion which represented hope encouraging art and labour under the influence of peace. The French, however, always represented this colony as a masterpiece of policy, an element of Anglican power, pregnant with events. Perron, when dwelling on the moral prodigies of the settlement, declared that these but disguised the real objects of its founders, which, however, could not escape the discernment of statesmen. They saw the formidable germ of great revolutions. The expedition of Baudin was connected by English politicians with a project of French colonization. His instructions directed him to inspect narrowly the places eligible for occupation, and it was expected that an Australian pondicherry would become a new focus of rivalry and intrigue. The special injunctions to survey the inlets of Van Diemen's Land seemed to indicate the probable site of an establishment so obnoxious. Dr. Bass had, however, already examined this country with similar views, especially the margin of the rivers. To him, no spot on the eastern side of the Derwent appeared to equal the neighbourhood of Risdon Creek, around which he observed an expanding area of fertile land. He delineated not less favourably the valley of the Tamar. This country he considered preferable to New South Wales, with a greater proportion of fertile soil, more amply supplied with water, and well adapted for colonization. End of Chapter 2. Discovery.